Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. For this week's new release, we're tweaking our schedule just a bit. As you are probably aware, our new audiobook release schedule is meant to sync up with Jessie's new book release schedule, and Jessie doesn't have a new book release this week. So, instead, our new release is episode 4 of Second Chance with You. That's book 4 in Jessie's Baxter Boys series. Now, I'll have a bit about the story and a preview of episode 4 for you in just a bit. But first, I wanted to share some thoughts of something I heard this past week. Sunday, in church, our pastor had a sermon that the Bible reading was from the 12th chapter of Romans. Now, his message was a little bit different than what I wanted to mention here, but chapter 12 is where Paul is telling the people of Rome about using the gifts that they're given, and that he uses the analogy of the human body having many members that do many different things. And so we should use our many different gifts as we are many different members in the body of Christ. Well, that had me thinking, because sometimes I think people tend to not use the gifts that they do have and have been given. And it's because they don't necessarily feel like their gifts accomplish much. Well, there were a couple of things that I was thinking about along those lines. The first, and I have no idea where I heard this. I heard it a long time ago. But if you think about a Swiss watch, a fine Swiss watch with all the gears and things, not all of those pieces in that Swiss watch are the same size, but they're all equally important. And you can only imagine what it would be like to try to operate without one of those pieces. Back to Paul's example in Romans 12, the body has many different members that serve many different purposes. Are there any parts of your body that you'd just like to give up because, I don't use it that much? I dare say there aren't many that you could do that with. But it's like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, if you can't do something great, do something small greatly. And that's what I would like to encourage you guys to do this week. Whatever your particular gift is, and trust me, you've got them. You've got a gift. Do whatever you can to make the world a better place with your gift. Okay. Thanks. Now let's talk a little bit about episode 4 of Second Chance with You. Now, as I've said before, and as we go along, it's getting more so. If you've not heard the previous 3 episodes, you may want to do this because it's going to be a little bit more inherently spoilerish as we go along. So be warned, this preview may contain light spoilers, hopefully not much. That said, this week, episode 4 continues the story of Ben Baxter, the oldest of the Baxter Boys, who has finally come home to Brickley Springs, Pennsylvania. He's come home because of a medical emergency for one of his family, and he didn't want to come home because he was scared somewhat that the life he left, the father he left, who was not a good person, may have raised his brothers in his image, for lack of a better word, I guess, and he didn't want his sisters to be around that. But also, he knew that he had also kind of misrepresented himself somewhat to his grandmother, saying that he was married. It's also the story of Riley Coleman, whose father owns the trucking company that she works for and has sent her to Brickley Springs to their home terminal to turn it around. And she knows that she needs Ben, her chief mechanic and the repair shop supervisor, to come with her to Brickley Springs for her to have any chance of accomplishing that task. Well, the problem is they don't really like each other much because they have some history. Ben decides to take Riley up on her offer to go back to Brickley Springs with one very interesting condition: that she agreed to marry him so that when he does meet his family, his lie that he's told that he's been married is now truth. So in episode 4, they have finally arrived in Brickley Springs. And that's where our sample reading picks up. So I hope you enjoy it. Then you'll come back for the full episode this Friday here on Say with Jay. They met the twins on the highway exit. Eve drove Riley's car, and Eden drove the car they shared. They left both cars there and piled into the back seat of Ben's pickup.
"That guy looks exactly like you, Ben,"
Eve said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. Ben glanced over. A tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and eyes, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, leaned against the building with his arms crossed over his chest and one booted foot braced against the wall behind him. It had to be one of his half-brothers. It wasn't quite like looking in the mirror, but close. The dude wasn't smiling either. "That must be the welcoming committee. They missed us last night." Ben wanted to ease the looks of consternation on his sisters' faces. This was part of the reason he'd never tried to get in touch. If his half-brothers were anything like his dad, they were mean, low-down snakes. Not people he wanted his sisters to have to deal with. Too late now.
"Should we send a delegation out to smoke a peace pipe before we all try to enter the sacred hunting grounds?"
Eden asked with a dramatic shiver. Ben eyed her in the rear view. "Why don't you just say, 'Ben, that dude looks scary. Go make sure he's not going to hurt us'?"
"Because I would sound like a 2-year-old if I said that."
"Oh, versus sounding like a 4-year-old talking about peace pipes and hunting grounds?" Riley and Eve chuckled. Eden rolled her eyes.
"I was trying to ease the tension."
Ben grabbed the latch on his pickup. He looked across the seat at Riley. "You okay for a minute?"
She nodded. "I've got a can of mace, and I'm not afraid to use it."
"Not on me, hopefully."
"I'm afraid it would be easy to get you two mixed up."
She nodded over at the man who hadn't moved but watched them with an intensity that stirred Ben's neck hairs. "Yeah." He pushed his door open. "Maybe he's just out there on a smoke break."
"And maybe he's packing. Be careful, Ben. He doesn't look like someone I'd mess with." "Don't worry, Riley."
Eden reached up and patted Riley's shoulder.
"Ben deals with guys like that all the time."
Ben got out and closed the door. He let his hands hang at his sides as he strode over. The guy straightened, watching him with the same brown eyes that stared back out at him from the bathroom mirror every morning. Ben stopped a few feet from him. The guy didn't say anything, and Ben considered waiting, but he was the oldest. He probably needed to speak first. He took his best guess. "Torque?" The guy's head jerked up. His eyes were honest and clear. Ben had worked with a lot of different kinds of men through the years, including some that were pretty shady. He'd also worked with a lot of decent, hard-working men. He'd become a fairly good judge between the two. Torque was honest and upright. Ben's heart cracked. He held out his hand. It's good to see you, brother. Torque's eyes moved from his face to his hand and back again. Then he straightened and grabbed Ben's hand. Ben jerked him forward into a big bear hug. Torque hugged him back. They parted, but Ben kept his arm around Torque's wide shoulders. Last time I saw you, you were about this tall and ugly as a mud fence. He held out his hand waist high. You grew, anyway. Torque's grin revealed straight white teeth. Better watch with the insults. You're my mirror image. Think you got that backwards, little brother. Torque laughed. Your wife and sister's getting out? Ben looked back at the pickup. Riley understood and got out immediately. Even Eden followed. Nice-looking family. Ben's head swiveled around. It was on the tip of his tongue to tell Torque hands off, but then he realized that Torque meant it as a sincere compliment. Those are your sisters, too. They must favor your mom, especially the blonde. That's Eden, and yeah, she looks just like Mom. He ran a hand through his hair. Did one ever recover from losing one's mother? The other one's Eve. She has our dark hair, but Mom's delicate bone structure. Wow, fancy words. Guess I might have ended up like that if I'd have had sisters. Women. Ben agreed. They shook their heads together. Riley walked up and slipped her arm around his waist, like they'd been married for years instead of one day. He could have kissed her. This is my wife, Riley. She held out her hand, and Torque shook it carefully.
It's great to finally meet you,
she said. Same, Torque answered. Eve and Eden, this is your brother, Torque. They both shook his hand, eyeing him up and down. No one really seemed to know what to say. Ben was too busy trying to keep his focus anywhere but on the slim arm that encircled his waist. Finally, Torque broke the awkward silence. Come on, Graham's doing better today.
Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.